The highway stretched endlessly before me, a dull gray beneath a sky wavering between sun and storm. I'd been driving since dawn, that long, agonizing journey that leaves you both anxious and numb. In the back seat, wrapped in layers of linen, was a wooden keepsake box carved by my father's hands. Inside, I placed a pair of silver candlesticks I'd inherited from my grandmother. Tonight, I intended to give them to Damien as a blessing for his engagement. My brother's house was 12 hours away, but I convinced myself that the distance was nothing compared to the years we'd spent together. When we were young, we were never miles apart. I remember sitting on the banks of the Pine River with enormous fishing rods in our hands, daring each other to catch the first fish. Damien would always cheat, pulling at the line and pretending he'd taken the bait. And I'd laugh until my ribs ached. Somewhere between the farms of Illinois and the hills of Missouri, the memories stayed with me. We whispered secrets under piles of blankets, wove stories on long car rides, and leaned on each other while my parents argued in the kitchen. I remembered those nights when Damien would sneak into my room after a nightmare, insisting he wasn't scared, just bored. He was the boy I wanted to see again, the one I was willing to drive half a day for. The hours grew heavier as the road narrowed toward the small towns. The petrol stations seemed to blend in, and coffee cups piled high on the passenger seat. My shoulders ached, but my chest held a stubborn hope. No matter how far time had separated us, I believed this dinner could be a bridge. The engagement was more than just a significant event. It was the beginning of a new family and a chance to reconnect with old ties that still held value. When I finally crossed into his town, the sky had turned a dull gray, as if it were suffocating before the rain. I adjusted the souvenir box on the seat beside me and whispered to myself, as if the candlesticks could hear me. This was worth it. As I turned onto Damien's street, the weight of exhaustion mixed with anticipation pressed against my ribs as I stepped into his driveway. The neighborhood was quiet when I entered. The kind of place where all the gardens seemed to be cut to the same length, where the porches hold identical wreaths. Damien's house was taller than I had expected, and with its clean lines and sharp angles, it was nothing like the house we grew up in. I sat for a moment with the engine off, my hands resting on the steering wheel, telling myself that the long journey had been worth it. I felt the weight of the wooden souvenir box as I lifted it from the seat. I stood up, climbed the stairs, and knocked. I heard only faint laughter from inside. Then the door suddenly opened. Natalie stood there, her hand still on the handle, her eyes slightly wide with surprise before returning to a cool expression. She glanced over me as if to make sure no one else was there, then back down to the box in my arms. "I brought something for the engagement dinner," I said, trying to warm my voice. She tilted her head, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Oh, they had it yesterday," she said lightly. Her words were like stones, each one sinking deeper. I blinked, thinking I'd misheard. "Yesterday? Just close relatives?" she added, as if suddenly remembering something, though her eyes never left mine. The box pressed against my arm until it felt like it was burning. Behind her, I heard the clinking of glasses, the scraping of chairs, and the murmurs of people I wasn't supposed to see. I froze. The barrier between us was stronger than any wall. Natalie's smile didn't fade, but she didn't step aside either. For a moment, I thought Damien might appear behind her, laughing and saying it was all a misunderstanding. But the seconds dragged on, and no one came. Natalie shifted and said politely, "Perhaps another time." Then the door closed. A quiet, final close, leaving me alone on the balcony, with nothing but the weight in my arms and the echo of voices that no longer included my own. I sat in the driver's seat, the souvenir box on the passenger side, like an accusation I couldn't tear my eyes away from. My arms still ached from carrying it out onto the balcony, waiting for a welcome that never came. The balcony light shone behind me, but no one opened the door again. No one called my name. Only faint laughter drifted through the walls, muffled and distant, as if I'd been erased from the picture. I stared at my phone, expecting half a message from Damien. A hasty explanation, or at least an apology. Nothing. The screen remained dark, the silence heavier than any words. My mind began to revisit memories of years past, small moments I'd folded away. His birthday when I'd spent hours to surprise him, only to find he'd gone camping with Natalie's family. The calls he'd promised to answer, but hadn't. The weekend when I'd paid a bill he'd sworn to pay. Every memory returned with the same quiet ending. I waited, and he was gone. I started the engine and drove off. The sound of tires on the gravel filled the space where the conversation was supposed to take place. The streets blended together in a similar monotony. Houses designed with perfect harmony. Families huddled behind curtains. Every lit window reminded me of a place I didn't belong. When I reached the outskirts of town, the highway stretched out like a dark ribbon, leading nowhere in particular. I couldn't face the long drive home that night, the box still locked beside me. I stopped at a roadside hostel, its neon sign humming faintly in the twilight. Inside, silence enveloped me. I placed the box on the table, untouched, and lay down on the hard mattress. My eyes remained open, tracing the cracks in the ceiling as old memories pressed against the still bleeding pain of rejection in my chest. What had once been laughter and secrets shared between siblings was now just the sound of a door closing, leaving me with a silence I hadn't chosen. The hostile night stretched into morning, leaving me restless and empty. When I finally got home, I was struck by an uncharacteristic chill, as if the stillness were deliberate. I placed the memento box on the entry table, unable to look at it, and went straight to the drawer I rarely opened. It was a simple wooden drawer in my office, but I knew exactly what it contained. A silent history of every sacrifice I had made for Damien. The first envelope I pulled out was stained with faded ink. The loan agreement I had handwritten when he asked for help starting his first business venture. $12,000, money I had painstakingly scraped together from savings I had set aside to fix my roof. He had promised to pay it back within a year. He swore it was the beginning of something substantial. That venture was shut down before the ink on his plans was even dry, and the repayment never came. Beneath it lay another pile of papers, property tax notices stamped in red. The year he called, he was nearly in tears because he and Natalie were about to lose their Flagstaff home. I transferred $27,000 to him the next morning without hesitation. He said he wouldn't forget what I'd done for him, and that he'd fix things as soon as they were settled. I never brought it up again, even as months turned into years. Then there was the credit card, the one in my name that he only carried for emergencies. The balance went up and down over time, but the pattern never changed. Dinners, flights, things I never asked about. I paid it every month, convincing myself it was easier than starting a fight. I laid the papers on the desk one by one, the numbers staring back at me like a record of misplaced trust. Every promise echoed in my mind, that I will return the favor. I will not forget this, and you will not regret it. And yet here I am, sitting in a quiet house, the drawer open like a confession, the papers blurry before me, and for the first time in years, I wondered whether my loyalty had cost me not only money, but also the respect I thought I had earned. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table, the papers still scattered before me. The numbers no longer seemed like a help. They felt like chains I'd willingly chained around my wrists. The thought made my stomach churn. I picked up the credit card and held it in my hand. The plastic was worn, its edges soft from being yanked out of a wallet, swiped across tables I'd never seen, and used to pay for meals I'd never tasted. My name was printed on it, yet it wasn't truly mine. I reached for the phone and dialed the number on the back. The voice on the other end was polite and efficient, asking me to confirm my decision. Yes, I said firmly and clearly. Cancel immediately. After a few keystrokes, there was silence, and with it, the heavy burden I'd never known I carried vanished. I sat back in my chair, feeling the air around me clearer and freer. For years, I had convinced myself that sacrifice was love, that paying off his debts, helping him out of trouble, keeping his credit card open. All of this proved I was a good sister. But love that becomes an obligation loses its luster and begins to resemble weakness. The house was quiet, a quiet that had weighed heavily on me since Henry's death. Tonight, it felt different, less hollow, as if the space were reclaiming itself. I thought about the years I had equated devotion with silence, the times I had let guilt dictate my choices. Perhaps respect was never absent from him. It was I who lacked it. When I finally went to bed, I expected remorse to keep me awake, but instead, I closed my eyes and fell asleep quickly, a sense of relief settling over me. For the first time in weeks, perhaps months, I slept without dreaming of doors slamming in my face. As morning arrived, I awoke to a serenity I didn't know I could bear. 5 days passed before the phone finally rang. I was trimming the last of the late summer roses in the garden when I saw Damien's name flash on the screen. For a moment, I watched it ring, remembering all the times I'd called him and he hadn't answered. This time, I let it ring twice before picking up. Nora, the card isn't working. Did you forget to pay? His voice was sharp and halting. There was no greeting, no silence, just panic simmering in his words. I could hear voices in the background. Natalie, her tone hurried and curt, a muffled knock, maybe a street vendor at the door. A child had cried somewhere in the house. Leaves rustled. The edges of his world seemed frayed, unraveling. I tried 3 times, he continued, his voice hurried. They said it was declined. We have bills here, people waiting. What's going on? The moment enveloped me like a still pool. No racing heartbeat, no immediate scramble to fix it, just quiet. The same card that had bound me to his emergencies no longer held me captive. I canceled it, I said quietly. He fell silent, and I heard a click on the line between us. Then came the sound of disbelief, that faint laugh I knew so well. What are you saying, Nora? You simply can't. How are we supposed to? I closed my eyes and inhaled the scent of freshly picked roses. It was never meant to be yours, Damien. His words tumbled out, shifting from anger to pleading. Just until I sort things out. I'll pay you back. I swear this time. Please don't leave me hanging like this. But nothing stirred within me to respond to those old pleas. I let the silence expand, filling the void where my fear had resided. He waited, expecting me to be the one who always rushed to soften the blow. I was gone. I forgot, I said finally, my voice steady. Then, before he could reply, I ended the call. The roses at my feet somehow seemed brighter, their petals unfolding in the dim sunlight, as if they sensed a change. The calls didn't stop after the first one. Damien's phone rang again within an hour, and then again the following morning. Each time, his voice changed, shifting between tones like a man trying on masks. First, there was anger, his sharp, disjointed words designed to corner me. Then came logic, his words gentler, using the old persuasive technique I'd known since childhood. And finally, despair, the voice of a boy begging me not to leave him. I listened to him go through all these emotions just as I had so many times before. I remembered how he smiled when he needed something. How he blended his charm with guilt until I couldn't tell the difference. For years it worked. I believed him even when I shouldn't, thinking his need for closeness was proof of his love. But now, standing in my kitchen, the phone pressed to my ear, I realized the magic was broken. His charm no longer warmed me. It only reminded me of how much I had sacrificed without hesitation. "Nora," he said again, his voice trembling. "You don't realize how serious this is. Just a little longer." I closed my eyes, letting the silence hang between us until his words faded into a blur of noise. Then I spoke, my voice so faint I could hear the difference. "Oh, I forgot." The silence that followed was heavier than his anger, sharper than his pleas. Before he could reply, I ended the call. The house settled around me, no longer heavy, but still. I stood for a moment, the phone in my hand, feeling the ground beneath me as I hadn't felt in years. For the first time, the choice was mine, and it wasn't to save him, but to save myself. I placed the phone on the table, turned to the window, and watched the last rays of daylight fade into the distance, knowing that the silence between us had become irreversible. The messages began 2 days later, long strings of words trying to weave themselves into excuses. Damien's tone wavered wildly. First guilt, then sadness, then promises mixed with familiar despair that I never meant to hurt you. One of them read it. Another followed with, "You know I'll return the favor this time. Just don't abandon me." And then, "The family should not turn their back when things get tough." I read each sentence without replying. The sentences wobbled into a single, hollow melody I'd heard for years. They had once carried enough weight to lull me into silence. Now they sounded fragile, like an echo in an empty room. When I pulled out my phone to distract myself, Natalie's world shone brightly on the screen. Photos of dinner parties, raised glasses, and her comments brimming with joy. She pointed to Damien in every picture, their smiles perfect, their table overflowing. There was no trace of unpaid bills, no unanswered calls, no hint of the panic I'd heard in his voice. It was as much a performance for themselves as it was for anyone watching. They could erase me from the story with a smile, just as they'd slammed the door in my face. The thought no longer hurt. It was clearer. Their love hadn't been unconditional. It was like a chain that tightened with every concession. I put the phone down and let the silence return. For the first time, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt as though I had chosen the distance myself. The keepsake box still sat untouched on the entry table, its polished wood gleaming in the midday sun. I ran my hand over it, feeling no urge to hand it over. It was mine until I decided otherwise. Outside, the air carried the crisp breezes of autumn, and I realized that the seasons were changing around me, just as I was changing within them. The life I had lived at their mercy was folding away like a chapter, and something more stable was beginning to take its place. The following weeks passed at a more relaxed pace. Without Damien's card charges appearing on my statements, I saw numbers I hadn't seen in years. What had been drowning in debt was mine again, and the shift felt like opening a window in a room I hadn't realized was suffocating. My first choice was practical. I sent an extra payment toward the mortgage, watching the balance dwindle with a satisfaction that had nothing to do with the numbers, but with control. Each payment was a small declaration that this house, this roof, was mine because of my own effort, not because I had surrendered myself to someone else's needs. My second choice was joyful. I signed up for an art class at the community center, something I had always put off because of financial constraints. I walked into that bright room one Thursday evening, the smell of paint and clay filling the air, and sat among strangers with hidden longings. It felt like reclaiming a part of myself I had long neglected when I picked up a brush again. My third choice was for others. I wrote a check to the women's shelter downtown, anonymously and quietly, without needing recognition. I knew what it felt like to give without being seen. But this time, it wasn't about being ignored. It was about standing up for those who deserved to know they weren't alone. Each act was small on its own, but together they felt like they were redrawing a new balance. What had been taken without thanks was now building something solid, something that belonged entirely to me. And as autumn deepened, I found myself ready for what was to come. The call came late, after the house had fallen into its usual quiet. Damien's voice was slow, heavy with something that might have been regret, though I wasn't sure. He stammered about mistakes, about pressures I couldn't understand, and about his desire to make things right. I let him talk. My silence was no longer a cage, but a boundary. When he finally stopped, waiting for me to soften, I simply said I'd heard him. I offered nothing more. After we ended the call, I walked to the hallway where the keepsake box still sat. For weeks, it had been in plain sight, a reminder of what I'd intended to give him, something I never thought would carry our family history forward. I lifted it gently, carried it to my desk, and opened the drawer in the dresser where I keep my most important things. I placed it inside and locked it with a small brass key. It no longer felt like a hidden gift. It was now a keepsake, waiting for someone who would understand its value and treat it with the respect it deserved. I stood there for a moment, my hand resting on the steps, realizing that legacy isn't inherited by blood alone. It's earned through respect, nurtured through care, and passed on to those who prove worthy of it. For years, I had equated family with duty, love with sacrifice, silence with loyalty. Now I saw them for what they truly were, choices I could have made differently. And in that realization, I felt the ground beneath me solidify. I turned off the light in my study and walked into the quiet of my room, carrying not loss, but a newfound certainty of belonging.
अंधेरी दीवारों में खुद को ढूंढता हूँ मैं ये जो दिन सहाने थे उन्हीं को सोचता हूँ मैं तुम्हारे बिन ये मौसम भी बड़ा बेसर्द लगता है दिल का हर एक कोना अब बहुत ही दूर भरता है अंधेरी दीवारों में खुद को ढूंढता हूँ मैं ये जो दिन सुहाने थे उन्हीं को सोचता हूँ मैं तुम्हारे बिन ये मौसम भी बड़ा सर्द लगता है दिल का हर एक कोना बहुत ही दूर भरता है मेरे साए भी मुझसे अब जुदा होने को कहते हैं तुझे खोने की राहों में ये आंसू बहने लगते हैं कहाँ जाऊं कहाँ ढूंढूं मेरा वो साजो सामा तो मेरी हर एक तमन्ना तू मेरी रूह का मका तू लकीरों में नहीं लिखा जो तुमने ख्वाब देखा था वफा की इस कहानी में फकत एक गम ही लिखा था सितारों से भी पूछता है पता तेरा कहाँ होगा मगर खामोश है दुनिया कहाँ मेरा जहाँ होगा बस एक बार मुड़ के देख ले मेरी बेबसी की सूरत मुझे है आज भी तेरी वफा की सख्त जरूरत साए मेरे तन्हा सफर बस रह गया दर्द का असर साए मेरे तन्हा सफर बस रह गया दर्द का असर